So the statement of the Gemara that we're trying to analyze is the crushing of grapes or foods that already had been squeezed, and now you're putting something on that's going to allow more of the juices to come out. Gemara says that the first opinion, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Lazar said that this is the opinion of the Tana Rabbi Lazar. And the Gemara is trying to analyze why didn't he say that it was Rabbi Elazar? Why do you have to say that at first that it was Rabbi Yishmael? So the Gemara says because there's a distinction there. By the honey, it was food to start with, and it ended up food as well, because honey is food and honeycomb is food. Whereas in grapes becoming juice, there we need a chiddush to say that too is permissible to be done on Shabbos. Rabbi Lazar says no, that there's a distinction. So he says, you're right. He said it in regards to honey, but he also said it in regards to grapes. When Rabbi Shaya came from Narada, this is 19b. 19b, about 8 lines in. He came along with a brisa in his hand, meaning that he brought along the text of a brisa. Olives and grapes that had already been crushed prior to Shabbos. More juices came out after Shabbos came in. It's prohibited, because that's the first opinion in this brisa says you've now created a extraction on Shabbos. However, Rabbi Lazar and Rishimim both say it's permissible, and whether this is a new extraction that we're afraid you're going to continue to do it on Shabbos, or because that's the original action. Either way, the idea is that this is prohibited according to the first opinion. But Rabbi Eliezer says even in a juice coming from a food by grapes and olives, it's also going to be awesome. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, Brisa Lishmili. Well, what did Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina? How come he didn't quote Rabbi Eliezer? That's because he didn't know this brisa, because it was a brisa that Rabbi Shaya had put on his own. Rabbi Lazar, my time Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina. What about Rabbi Lazar? How come he didn't say that it was Rabbi Yishmael in quoting the brisa that we said, which was garlic and boser, which is unripe grapes, malilas, that Rabbi Shmuel says you're allowed to, once you already crushed them and broke them down before Shabbos, you can allow it to continue oozing on Shabbos.
And you could have hana from the juice.
From the juice on Shabbos. Rabbi Lazar, my time Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, Amalcha Lab Itmer La Rabbi Bar Chanina, Rabbi Yechanan b'Mechusarim Dicha. Didn't we say over there, in regards to that, where he hadn't properly broken them down, broken it open, everybody agrees it's going to be prohibited. That means that if you didn't properly break the grape and begin the squeeze, or break the olive, crack the olive, everybody agrees it's going to be awesome. But you haven't really ground them down. You haven't really broken it down. You just cracked it, but you didn't. Shechika is
rub it. Finally grating it. Shechika, finally grating it finally. No.
Well, fine would be specific, but grating it. Shrika is really grinding it, pulping it. Yeah.
So
Vahani nami b'chasar dicha.
are they working on like defining, well, what is the ikar malacha of mefarik? Is that kind of like the
No. Everybody knows, like we mentioned yesterday, the mefarik. Everybody in this Gemara is going to hold that mefarik means when you're extracting something that's from something else. So you're taking the juices out of a solid. That's going to be mefarik. The question is not whether it's mefarik or not. The question over here is how much of a breaking down of the original fruit is going to count as sufficiently broken down that that the oozing that happens on its own afterwards is already done because it's already been broken down.
That's what I meant. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. So if you just cracked it, it broke the skin, that's not going to be sufficient. Everybody's going to agree that whatever happens on Shabbos is continuing to be extraction. When you more than broke it, you crushed it. However, you didn't, pulp it. Then that's where there's a machlokas. Rabbi Shmuel says it's going to be okay. And by cases of garlic or melilos, which is grains, there you may have broken it, but whatever you're squeezing out after Shabbos, that's still missing the basic breaking. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef B'Chanina ka Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Yosef B'Chanina said the halach is like Rabbi Shmuel. Shemen shel badadim v'shel mechatzela shel badadim. So the Rashi learns that we've switched into muktzah. Once we're talking about olives and we're talking about presses, so we're talking about a muktzah question of items that have a little bit of oil left from the pressing process that you may want to sell. Now, since you want to sell it, it's a muktzah. It's muktzah on account of that it's marketable, and so you don't want to use it. Anything that you plan to market, you don't want to use on Shabbos because you want to sell it, and that makes it something set aside for Shabbos, and it's muktzah. You're not allowed to move it. So that's the way Rashi learns. Tosfos learns, no, we're still in the midst of the question of what's part of the olive press or not. But the Tosfos has a different way. We're going to go with Rashi. And so the question over here is whether or not these are muktzah because there's a little bit of olive oil left in the crevices, or there's absorbed olive oil in these mats. And the question is whether you could sell them, or if he plans to sell them, so it's going to be muktzah. So Rav says it's muktzah. Shmuel says that it is permissible. And the Gemara is going to tell us that there's a fundamental machlokas in muktzah. Rabbi Yehuda holds that muktzah is much broader, that anything that you wouldn't use on Shabbos, that you didn't specifically intend essentially to use on Shabbos, is going to be muktzah. And so he has a much broader interpretation of muktzah. You're not allowed to move it because it's not a part of your Shabbos set. Rabbi Shimon holds that no, muktzah is very narrow. We're going to find terms in the Gemara as much as to say as Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of muktzah. He does. The Gemara tells us, but it's very narrow and specific, and he only has specific ideas of muktzah. And we'll see. Essentially, we paskin like Rabbi Shimon, and that's what Shmuel is saying over here. That no, even though that these are marketable things, but they've already been in use, and therefore there's no muktzah. Shmuel Shar. Hani karchi the zuzi. There are different versions of what this is, but essentially we'll go with that these are mats that we use to cover produce in shipment. these two is a question whether or not there's muktzah. Rav Asar. Rav says it's Asar because it's a business thing. It's a merchandise cover. But Shmuel Shari, and Shmuel says no, there's no muktzah on it, and it's permissible. Amar Nachman, Eiz lechalba v'rachil legizasa v'tanagelas lebeitzasa v'tori ridya v'tamari the iska. If you have goats that you intend to milk and lambs that are to be sheared and hens for their eggs and bulls for the rodeo and dates to be sold and to be shipped off to be sold to other places. So Rav Asa Shmuel Amar Mutter. Rav says that they are going to be prohibited again as a muktzah, and Shmuel says that it's permissible. And the basis of the machlokes in these three, according to Rashi's interpretation, these three statements of Rav and Shmuel, the basis of the machlokes is the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon in how far to take muktzah. And we'll see much more about this. So just this is to whet your appetite about muktzah. There's a concept of anything not set aside to be used for Shabbos, or set aside specifically that you will not use for Shabbos, depending how broadly or narrowly you take it, will be muktzah. Muktzah in its fullest form is you may not move it at all, regardless of need. You may not use it. It is set aside and intentionally not to be moved for Shabbos. It must remain where it is. In certain muktzah, it'll be narrower, where we'll say, no, you can move it if you need the item itself or you need the place. But other than that, you can't just handle it. Hahu Talmida, the Erbe Becharta de Arges, who ruled in the place of Charta de Arges, Rabbi Shimon. And he ruled in muktzah leniently like Rabbi Shimon. Shamte Rav Amnuna. Rav Amnuna excommunicated it. So Gemara says, why? Rabbi Shimon Svirala. We pass like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is a halacha, so why would he excommunicate him? He said, yeah, of course, but it was Ba'asrei the Rav. It was in the city of Rav. You don't come into the city of Rav and rule like Shmuel in regards to muktzah. He shouldn't have done this. Hani trade Talmidi chad matzil b'chad mana, b'chad matzil b'arba v'chamesh mana. A comifel give a pluk to Rabbi Razav the Baravuna. Gemara concludes with, before the Mishnah, with one last story. There were two students in regards to saving food for Shabbos from a fire. We'll see more about this. The question is, should you put whatever food you're going to save into one basket? So this way you're only doing one muktzah, one carrying, and the other would carry in multiple baskets. And this is based on that you can, in one basket, you can put in as much food as you need. And this is based on machlokes that we'll see later at length in about 3 months from now, 2.5 months from now. But the Gemara is just saying that we had students ruling like different chachamim, and they were based on the machlokes of Rabbi Razav and Rav Huda. We'll see much more about that. So we're going to do the last Mishnah of the parak. Second Mishnah. We are in the last lesson. Sorry? What? Oh, yeah. Lazy kids these days. Kids are just lazy.
Pick them up.
Yeah. All right. 19b at the bottom, your testament base at the bottom. Ein solin basar batzel lobeitza. We saw this the other day. You do not roast meat, onions, and egg, unless you're sure that they would be completely done and roasted before Shabbos comes in. Ve'ein nosnin pasla taner. We don't put bread into the oven im chashecha right before Shabbos. V'lo charor al gabi cholim, or another type of loaf on coals. There was a type of bread that they would make by sitting on the coals. Only if it had enough time that the surface would get crusted before Shabbos. Rabbi Lezer says, "Oh no, not the surface; it's the bottom surface." And the Gemara is going to ask, which one's the top, which one's the bottom? Now, in our breads, that wouldn't be a logical question, but as you know, their breads were basically a dough slapped on the side of the oven. So if you have a dough slapped on the side of the oven, which side is the bottom? The side of the oven or the side of the fire? It's a good question. So the Gemara is going to talk about that. You're allowed to lower the Pesach, which was done on the entire animal, the entire lamb was roasted as one, and on a spit, and they would put it down into a fire pit or into an oven, and these were ovens that had a opening at the top, so you're going to lower it down, even though you're starting at the beginning of Shabbos, because we're not concerned that on Shabbos that you're going to change the heat of the fire on Shabbos, whereas normally we say that we're concerned you're going to change the temperature. You're going to see it's not roasting well. You're going to change add coals or fan the flames or do something like that. On Pesach, the carbon Pesach, we're not concerned about that. In the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohanim would walk around on the stone floor barefoot, and so they, in the chambers of the Kohen, basically the sleeping quarters of the Kohanim that were on duty, they would have, it was called Beis HaMoked, the fire room, because they had a big fire going all the time. So before Shabbos, they would set up a fire that would last for the entire Shabbos, or as long as you could. And so they would only ignite one side of this pyre, and it'll slowly catch throughout. And that was permissible on Shabbos. And normally we'd say you can't do that because we're afraid that it's not catching well to the rest of the logs, and so that you're going to work on it to make the fire spread from one to the next. But in the Beis HaMoked and the Beis HaMikdash, there was no such concern, and therefore you're allowed to do it. However, bigvulin, and outside of the Beis HaMikdash, you need that the fire had caught on most of the log, on most of the fire, in order to allow it to go for Shabbos. If you have coals, meaning wood that's already been burned, so as long as it caught fire in a little bit, it's okay, because at that point you know it's going to last and not going to die out. So the first thing is, it says that it has to be you have to cook your food that it's going to be somewhat cooked before Shabbos. How much is cooked before Shabbos that you can let your food continue cooking on Shabbos? Amar Rabbi Laza, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav Kadesha Yitzulum and B'ad Yom, it has to be that it's roasted before Shabbos, Kamacha ben Rusai. Like Ben Rusai, who was a bandit, and he would eat things rare. So it's enough to be eaten like that. Rashi says a third of the way cooked. And the Rambam says halfway cooked. Either way, rare or medium rare, it's got to be somewhat cooked. Edible, but not very well done. Itmar Nami, Amar of Asi, Amar of Yochanan, Kolshu Kamacha ben Nusay, Amar Mishum B'Shulei Nachem. Also, similarly, we see that food that is cooked enough to be edible but to Ben Nusay counts as cooked in regards to the prohibition of eating food that were cooked entirely by a non-Jew. Now, halacha is that if a Jew cooked it a third of the way, and then the non-Jew cooked the rest of it, that would also be considered that it was already cooked by the Jew, and therefore there's no prohibition of bishul akum, cooked by a non-Jew, in such a manner. Tanya Chananya Omer Chananya says, "Kosher kamachem and say mutal ashes agabe kira alpha pishen and grufa ktuma." We'll see later in a couple of weeks that the halacha is you can't leave something on the fire to continue cooking, a pot on the stove to continue cooking, unless the fire is either covered or the source of heat has been removed. So whether you have a cover over it to show you that it's Shabbos and that you shouldn't change the temperature, or you remove the source of heat. So that's in the times of their ovens, you would take out the coals and take out the fire. So you're not allowed to leave food there to continue cooking unless you've done either one, or it's already cooked. That's what Hananiah says, that if you have something that's already been cooked, that's something that Ben Drusai would eat, so then it's considered fully cooked enough that you're allowed to leave it on the fire even without covering the heat source. Einos and as a pass, the next statement in the Mishnah was that you can't put bread in the oven before Shabbos unless it'll already get a crust before Shabbos. What is the bottom? Is it the side facing the fire, the heat? Or the one touching the wall? Or is the underside the one that's closest to the fire? Tashema, Rabbi Eliezer, so we have a brisa where Rabbi Eliezer says it more explicitly. Until there's a crust on its surface that touches the wall. Literally, the translation is that stuck to the oven. We also saw in the Mishnah that you would lower the Pesach entirely into the oven and let it cook on Shabbos. And this is on a Erev Pesach that came on Shabbos. My time, Erev Pesach is Friday. Shabbos is Pesach, and you're cooking it, letting it cook through the night. Not through the night, into the night. So Meshum de Bnei Chabura is the reason, because the people at the Seder are diligent, right? You're at the Seder, you know the rules, and people are going to remind each other, hey, don't touch that. Don't change a fire. It'll be as good as it is. Oh, lav hachi, but if not for that, Amar Mar, if not for that, you say it's prohibited. Why? Amar Mar, but we said earlier, Gadia, a goat, and Korban Pesach can be a goat. Bein sharik and bein lo sharik shapir, that whether you seal the oven or not, it's going to be okay. The Gemara says no, it depends. Asa mintach, there the goat is cut up into pieces, and since the goat is cut up into pieces, so it's bad for it to have fresh air hit it, and so it doesn't cook well that way. So you're never going to open the oven door to change the temperature. But by the Korban Pesach, you cook it whole, you roast it whole, and therefore it doesn't make a difference if you open the oven or not. And so we're concerned that you would open the oven, if not for it being Pesach, and there's a group of people for the Seder, we would not let this go in right before Shabbos. But since people are careful and they'll remind each other, you can keep it on. You can put it in right before Shabbos. We said by the Beis HaMokad, you can just ignite one corner of the pyre, and that's sufficient. Anonymily. So how do we know this? Amar Avuna. So Avuna says the basis for the Beis HaMokad, the room in the Beis HaMikdash, being different, is based on the pasuk where we saw in last week's reading, the Torah said, "L'sevaru eish b'chol moshvasechem." Do not ignite a fire in all of your dwellings. B'chol moshvasechem yatamavi. In your dwellings, you don't ignite a fire. But you're allowed to ignite a fire in the Beis HaMoked room, in the room that the Kahanim dwell in the Beis HaMikdash. Gemara says, what are you talking about? If that's the case, that the prohibition of lighting a fire on Shabbos does not apply in the Kahanim's quarters in the Beis HaMikdash, so then why do you have to ignite it before Shabbos? Let them light the fire on Shabbos. And of course, that's not what the Mishnah is saying. Of course, they can't light a fire on Shabbos, even in the Beis HaMoked. You're right. There is such a drash. It says to tell us that only in your dwelling places you're not allowed to start a fire, but you can start a fire somewhere else. So that's talking about on the Mizbeach itself, on the altar, where the Torah says that you should bring Evarim and Pedorim. You bring the Karbanos, the remainder of Karbanos, onto the Mizbeach to burn overnight. There, you're allowed to do it because that's a part of the service of the Beis HaMikdash. But there's no heter, there's no permission to. This pasuk does not mean that you can light a fire in the Beis HaMoked, in the living quarters of the Kahanim. That's not a part of this. And in fact, our Mishnah clearly indicates that it's not, because it's only telling you that before Shabbos, you're allowed to ignite it in a manner that it'll only start the fire, but it would not let it run yet, and then it's going to, on its own, spread throughout the pyre over Shabbos. So the Gemara says the reason is something else. Normally, we'd say, what are we concerned about? That it's not catching fire well, and it's not moving from one log to another log fast enough, and so you're going to fan the flames, and that's going to be a Oraisa, a Torah prohibition of igniting fire, moving it from one place to another. Kahanim's reasoning. The Kahanim are diligent. They have to be constantly performing at peak because there's a lot of halachos, and they're diligent about that, and they're there to remind each other, and therefore we don't have to be concerned that the Kahanim are going to break Shabbos in fanning the flames or changing the fire. Bigvulin, however, a person in his own home, there the halacha is kadesh te'achaz beruba. It has to catch. The fire has to catch to most of it. So Gemara says, most of what? My ruba. Amarav rov kol echad ve'echad. The majority of every one of the logs has to be, the surface of every one of the logs has to be caught on fire. Shmuel says, no, that's too strict. Shmuel says all that it means is that the fire is strong enough and it's caught enough that you wouldn't usually say, bring me some more kindling so that I can put it underneath and make sure that the fire is strong. So if for all of you Boy Scouts out there, when you want to start a fire, you have to have some kindling and you have to make sure that it catches well so that the logs will catch well. And Shmuel says all you need is that it's caught well enough that you no longer saying, okay, give me some more kindling to make sure this fire lasts. Tana Rabbi Chia l'siyur l'Shmuel. And Rabbi Chia has a brisa that concurs with Shmuel. Because the brisa says all you need is enough that the flame is now going up on its own. And not that the flame is still going up through something else, meaning through kindling, through fanning. It has to be that now the flame, you can watch it and it is just, it's lit. It's going up. What happens if you have a single log? So Rav Amar, Rav Avya, you need most of the thickness of the log to have been caught. And some say what he said was most of the circumference. Rav Papa, Amar Papa, Hilkach bin Rav Avya uber Rav Kefa. Therefore, Rav Papa says if you have a single log, which is much harder to make sure that it stays alight, you need the majority of the surface, the circumference, and the majority of the depth. Ketanoi, as we have in Machlekes, Rabbi Chia Amar Kadeshi Yishaches Eitz Memlechas Ha'uman. Rabbi Chia says that it has to be enough that the wood would now be destroyed, that no woodsmith would want to use it. And for that, it has to, Rashi says, it has to be that the majority of the circumference is a light, because that's sucking all of the juices out from inside, and now it's too dry to work with. Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira says it doesn't need to be all around, it just needs to be on two sides. And even though he doesn't have a verse for it, but he does have a hint in a verse for it. Like the two sides, the fire consumed, and the middle has now been blackened or dried out. Will it be sufficient for work? So you see that wood is ruined if even two sides are burned. That would now no longer be usable for woodworking, which tells us that the inside is drying out. It's sucking out the juices, and that tells us that it's caught enough that you can now leave it there for Shabbos, and we're not concerned you're going to fan the flames. Once we brought Sukkim regarding from the Navi Cheskel regarding lighting fire, so now we have another pasuk from Yirmiyahu regarding lighting fire, and this is in regards to Yehoyakim throwing a letter of a warning into the fire. The ha'ach lefanav ma'avares, and the brother literally was in front of him in the ma'avares. So my ach, what is ach? Amar of achvana, mishmula ma'etzim shenidliku b'achvana. It's some sort of basin, like a fire pit, a movable fire pit, that they would have a basin and logs in there to create a movable fire, and that fire was had already caught, and he threw it in either into that basin or into the wood that was caught. And fire logs are called he'ach, brothers, because you need two of them next to each other in order to really be a good fire. It was somebody in the market saying, "Who wants achvana?" This term that the pasuk that we just used over there, and it found that it was an arvasa, this basin type of thing. So we see that achvana is a type of basin, wood for fire. Amar Rav Huna, kanem ein tzrichem roiv agdam roiv tzrichem roiv. The first version over here is that when you have reeds, so individual reeds, there you don't need most of it to catch fire in order for you to leave it. They are good fuel. They burn well, and so as long as you caught one side of it is caught fire, that's sufficient, and we can assume that it'll burn well, and you won't have to fan the flames or change it, and therefore you're allowed to keep it on Shabbos. However, Ugdam, if they are bundled as reeds, so there's not enough oxygen, not enough air to get through it, and therefore you have to make sure that most of it's caught fire, otherwise it won't burn well. Garinin, if you have pits, they would sometimes use sediment or pits as a source of fuel for a fire. So if you have just the pits themselves, and then you don't have to make sure that it's mostly caught fire because they burn well. However, if they're in a wicker basket, where they're bundled together, there's not enough air, and it needs you need to make sure it's mostly caught. Rav Chisda says quite the contrary. It's logical the other way around. Kanim mabadran. Individual reeds, so they're going to just fall apart, and then the fire is going to die out because they'll just separate. But whereas if you have a bundle of reeds, so since they're very good fuel, they'll catch from one to the other, and you'll have a solid fire for a while. Similarly with the pits. Garinin badram, they fall apart from the pile, and so therefore it's going to end up not being a strong fire. Nasa b'choslos, but they're in a wicker basket, so it holds it together. It'll be a good fire. Lama badra. It manami, indeed, we have a statement like that on Chaf Amud Beis 20b. Amar of Kahana, Kanim Sha'agdam Tzricha Roiv, that the Gra changes it. We're going to go with the Gra's text there. Amar of Kahana, Kanim Sha'agdam, reeds that have been bound together, Ein Tzricha Roiv, you don't have to have them bundled together. You don't have to have the majority, since they're bundled together, you don't have to have the majority of it caught fire, but rather, as long as a little bit is lit, it's enough. However, they're not bound together, then you need to make sure that the majority of it's caught, because they're going to fall apart, and then you won't have a good fire. Garinin, similarly, in the seeds, they need a majority. However, if they're in a basket, now you have a lot of it held together, you don't need the majority of them to be together. Tana of Yosef, Arba Maduras and Ein Tzricha Roiv. Now, 4 types of fuel that if you have a flame coming out of them, you don't need to wait for the majority of it to catch fire. Rather, you just assume that it's going to last as a good fire and it'll be fine. Shel Zephes, if it's the fuel is tar. Shel Gufris, sulfur. Shel Gavina, the text we have is cheese, others change the text. Shel Revav, or of any oil or wax. B'maslita Tana, in the Bryce it says, Av shel kashu shel gvava, also hay and straw. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, eitzim shel bavel and tzrichen roiv, woods that come from bavel, they're dry and burn well, and also don't need it. You can assume as soon as it's lit, it's going to remain lit, and we're not concerned you're going to fan the flames on Shabbos. Maskav l'ariezim mahi, what is that? Ile masilti. Are we talking about that? It's actually sawdust. Hashta psila ama ula amalik tzarshi baroiv. If you make a wick out of it, and we'll see about this, that when you make a wick out of wood strands or sawdust, that the halacha is that you're going to need that the majority is of it caught fire because it may burn down. So for sure, the sawdust itself. Elamar of Yosef, shucha de arza. What this is actually is, it's not the sawdust, but it's a mesh-like dry wood that's underneath the bark, that's around the trees. Rav Rama says it's mulch. It's bigger chunks of wood. Either way, these are going to be counted as a type of fuel that burns well. And since it burns well, you don't need to be worried that maybe you're going to fan the flames. So as long as it caught fire before Shabbos, you know that your fire is going to last for a while, and we're fine. But other wood, where you have logs, you have to make sure that the logs are caught all around in order to make sure that you're not going to fan the flames to keep the fire going through Shabbos. Adolach Yitzis Shabbos. With this, we complete the first parak of Shabbos. We shall come back to you as a Hashem Yisparach. We have minutes. I'll just do the introduction to the next parak, the next Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to talk about the what you're allowed to use as wick and what you're allowed to use as oil for your Shabbos candles. The Mishnah assumes we already know that you have to light Shabbos candles, and then it's just asking, what can you use as a wick, and what may you not use as a wick? What's a good substance for your wick? And then in the middle, it switches to, and what kind of oil, what kind of fuel can you use? What counts as a good oil, and what is not a kosher oil for your Shabbos candles. that this will